Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Still have a rough voice, not feeling quite as horrible as I've been, so I wanted to get this done. Plus, of course, I was the host for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge, so I actually got my card done on time. Video was done, but I sounded so absolutely atrocious that I couldn't do the voiceover. So now my voice is slowly coming back. Want to get this done. Kids are in bed. It's like, just do it. Okay, so I'm starting with the Studio Katia Kind Bouquet stamp set. I have some Strathmore ready cut watercolor paper here. I have the smooth side of the watercolor facing up, and I am stamping this image with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, just really black ink. And then I am using clear embossing powder. You don't have to do this. I just like doing it because it enables me to move a little faster, and I don't have to worry so much about like one area bleeding into another, and I don't have to be as careful because I don't have the patience. I generally don't have the time, and this kind of gives me that little safety net that I like. So with that said though, I actually took a little more time coloring this than I normally do. Like I have shown in many videos, like ways to fake it, ways to like faux watercolor, or, you know, make it look like you know what you're doing when you don't, which is me 90% of the time, you know, that sort of thing. But today I thought I would not necessarily experiment, because I know what I'm doing. It's just something I don't normally do, and that's use a lighter hand with watercolor. I am very heavy-handed with color. I have a very hard time not just putting all the color down at once. But because this was a color challenge, and because I was the host, I thought I'd put in a little more effort. Plus, I was kind of curious to see what would happen. So I'm not mixing colors at all. I am not layering colors at all. I'm using one color. I'm just using a pink from this little Prima watercolor palette that I love. This is the Prima Pastel Dreams. I've done a bunch of videos using this. I really just like these colors. So I'm using just the pink for these roses. That's it. And I am working a little slower. I've sped it up, obviously, in editing, but when I was painting, I was working a little slower, and I was, you know, applying the concentrated watercolor with one brush, and then I was taking a clean wet brush to kind of pull it out, so you get those areas of lightness and darkness, and nothing too rocket sciencey. It really just kind of takes some patience and some practice. So I did 2 or 3 layers of just that one color, and then for the leaves and the stems, I'm using just a brown from that same palette, because the Color Throwdown Challenge this week is pale pink, brown, black, white. So I'm sticking to it. So I did all the, you know, watercoloring, let it completely dry. I die cut it with the coordinating die. And then I'm using the large Kindness word from the same set. And I am white heat embossing that onto some black cardstock. And still enjoying this container, like using it this way. It's funny. I'm so used to using just a coffee filter always. I still use the coffee filters for every other color other than white. That's not ever going to change really, because I'm not going to have like, you know, 50 containers like this. But for my white, because I use so much of it and so frequently, like pretty much every card, I do like those containers. So I'll have links like always. So I stamped that word, white heat embossed it, die cut it with the coordinating die, and then I stamped the remaining part of the sentiment just onto a piece of pink cardstock, which when I was lining it up on my grid mat, I realized both ends were not straight, which sometimes I can catch in time, because the only reason it even matters is because I want to trim this with my paper trimmer. Usually I'm always stamping them and die cutting them now that I have those like sentiment label dies from pretty much every company. But this I just wanted to trim down very, very small with my paper trimmer. So I got it trimmed down, and this, I love this. This is a little Tim Holtz, my voice might be coming back, but I can't talk. This is the Tonic little 8.5-inch guillotine trimmer, the Tim Holtz one. I love it. You saw there, I was able to line up this little tiny sentiment, even little tiny strips, and then I just hold them down really well with that plastic guard. And you know, you can trim off like slivers of cardstock, like slivers. Best paper trimmer. And I mentioned this again in my last, I think it was my last video, the one before, whatever. I have this small one, and then I have the big Tonic guillotine one as well. And amazing trimmers. The big one I've had for years and years and years. And then this little one I just got a couple years ago, I think, and love it. So trimmed that all down. I also pulled out some of my absolute favorite pattern paper, my favorite things, black and white stripes. And I trimmed down a little piece of that as well. And I'd also die cut some white cardstock with the Studio Katia grid cover wafer die. As I'm doing this voiceover, I just posted a video showing the new release as well as a big giveaway. So check out the previous video if you didn't. I'll have it linked at the end. So yeah, I die cut the grid cover, and it is A2 sized. And then I just applied adhesive around the outer perimeter, and then a few just little dots of adhesive here and there on the grid. I didn't cover the whole thing, just enough to kind of hold down the center areas, and then I was happy with it. And I'm adhering that over a white card base. I just like the look of that, how it just adds all this extra like texture, but it's not taking away from the floral images that are going to be like the main focus of this card. So I adhered that, and then before I finish off the card, I wanted to stamp the inside as well. So I pulled out the floral image again, and I'm going to stamp this with some Sponge Sugar Distress Oxide ink. So once I get that stamped, I'm going to then stamp the remaining sentiments from that same stamp set. So I've got that stamped with Sponge Sugar, and then the kindness word I am going to stamp with Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink. So kind of get everything sort of laid out how I want it. And then this one I'm going to stamp a couple times just to make sure I get good coverage on the inside of the card. So get that stamped. And then the last little bit of sentiment, I'm just going to stamp in that same Nocturne black ink. And then that's going to finish off the inside of the card. And I just like that I was able to get all three of the colors, like the black, the brown, and the pale pink on the white card base, just to really tie together the color challenge. I like when that happens sometimes, when it all just kind of comes together. Even when I was struggling, because I was still sick when I was like making this card, so it took me longer than usual, but it's so much, it's just, I don't know, it's satisfying when things come together. So got everything stamped on the inside, and now I'm going to start adhering everything to the card front. And I'm just using Simon Says Stamp's craft tacky glue to adhere everything. I did think about like popping stuff up with foam tape, etc., but decided this time to just adhere it all flat. So not usually my norm, but I have so much texture going on with the die cut and then the watercolor flowers, etc., that it works. So adhered everything down, and then once I get all of the sentiments into place, I remembered that I have some Nouveau Jewel Drops, the new ones, the Cocoa Blush. I was like, those would be perfect to just add a little bit to this card, just to kind of bring in more brown to the front, because there isn't really much there. So I pull these out, and the Jewel Drops, regardless of the color, like there's brown, there's a whole bunch of colors in the Jewel Drop line. These ones dry transparent. They're not opaque at all, so they end up looking just very, I don't know, they're really pretty. So I just applied a few. I kept a light hand. Maybe it was like the sickness affecting my brain. Usually I'm like, cover all of the things. Anyway, added a few, and then I also added a few little the 3mm majestic sequins from Studio Katia, just for that little tiny bit of sparkle, because I gotta have some sparkle in some way, you know. So added just a few of those kind of sprinkled around the image as well, just to kind of tie it all together. So these I adhered with just little dabs of the craft tacky glue, and I would just pick them up with my jewel picker, and my like ridiculously messy hair is totally getting in the way of my camera. Apologies. It was like sticking up all over the place, as it usually is, but yeah, this time it got caught on camera. Anywho, after I had finished applying the Nouveau Drops and the sequins, I did some light taps of the card just on an ink pad. It doesn't really matter what you use, and that just helps kind of smooth out the Nouveau Drops a little bit, so they end up looking a little more like enamel dots. And then I also remembered that I had these dark brown Woodgrain envelopes from Simon Says Stamp, and I still had some ink left on the stamp, but thankfully I didn't like actually smear anything, but I just re-stamped that rose image onto the envelope with that same spun sugar distress oxide ink. You're not going to get a perfect impression because there is that little bit of, you know, wood grain texture, but it just kind of finishes off the whole ensemble. And that's the card. So I will have a link to my blog post. I'll have a link to the color throwdown challenge if you want to check it out. Supplies, all that. Everything will be in the description box below the video, so you can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!